Okay.
Dan, just a heads up that I've got to hop off at 2 o'clock to climb onto the Central Florida Board of Directors meeting.
Yeah, and I know you have to jump off, Samantha, but if there are questions about the alcohol stuff there, that's what I'm going to kind of knock that out at the beginning. We saw a few questions on that. And if you need to stop and ask some questions, we'll move on. And I'll be the moderator for spending too much time on a topic. I'll jump in and we'll move on. If that's okay with everybody. Okay. We got about 5 minutes. So if you want to run through your notes, we'll get started in a few minutes. Any questions, Kevin, Rick, Samantha, John? Welcome, John. John, you're muted, my friend.
How's everybody?
He's still working on that beautiful hair.
Yeah, I just got out of the shower, so I was trying to get some air in it.
Carol's not here to compliment you on it, John.
I've been pressure washing all morning, so.
Are you in the mountains, John? Are you up there stuck in the mountains? You're stuck in the mountains.
We are stuck. Hold on, I'll make you all jealous. Just 1 second. Let me get rid of my background. There's
go.
Today.
Oh my gosh. Just leave that on there. We don't want to distract everybody.
Right. Oh, can you?
I see your pressure
tell where I
work,
stopped
John.
pressure washing yesterday?
Good work.
All right, there's how far I got. There's where I am today.
Hey, I let Rick Van want to show him your background. Where are you at today? You're way up in New York somewhere. Look at his. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, see? Awesome.
We just
John, where are you?
Up in Western North Carolina.
Let me show you what Tallahassee looks like. Right there, dark and stormy. That's the thunderstorm coming in any minute now. There you go. We got a lot to go on. Anything else, Catherine? Anything else? Why we have our panelists up here that you want us to cover today?
No, I just appreciate you kind of breaking this down into a format that my EDs can on and help increase the education process within our districts. I know we invited some of the restaurateurs to come in too, so hopefully they're going to take that and everybody just kind of starts developing a system. I think for most of our people, that's the issue. It's like, tell us what's required, what's the system, how do we do it?
Hey, Catherine, real quick, while we're waiting to get started here, we got about 3 minutes. Why don't you just give especially the panelists, a little bit of background on Florida Mainstreet, please?
Yeah, sure. So Florida Mainstreet is an economic development program. And what we do is we go into existing business corridors and create a model within that helps bring back investment to corridors. So a lot of our tenants are restaurants, small breweries, small lodging, that type of thing. A lot of retail in our districts. So we have what's called an executive director in there. That's the Main Street manager. And that's the person who tries to coordinate with all the members as to the activity within the district. Normally, we're not on this side of it. It's normally more community related, things that are going on. So this side for them is a little different because now we're more in that social services and almost enforcement, but not quite side. But it is getting that educational component out to the members in the district to try and keep everybody within the parameters. We've been very, the way things have come down with very short notice, 11/13, you're closed immediately. Having people on the street has been very effective for our members. So they're getting out there, they're getting the news out, they're trying to help businesses remodel. We helped a lot of restaurants remodel to takeout and delivery services. We get the word out for them. And so it's just trying to be another conduit of information for them.
We've got about 2 more minutes and we're going to get started right on time. It looks like we've got folks coming in. And again,
Dan, can I ask one question of the Main Street group? And because I don't know if it's a topic that you guys have handled, but they're talking about it in Bradenton. Because we have a Black Chamber of Commerce and a White Chamber of Commerce. And the Black Chamber of Commerce is trying to get development on their Main Street. And you hate to say that there are 2 in a town, but there are, there's an MLK Street in each one. And they're trying to get money to develop 2 Main Streets in each town. Is your group addressing that at all?
We have multiple districts and communities because corridors are different. You can have 2 or 3 business corridors or cultural corridors within a community.
Yeah.
So multiple corridors is not.
We have a small problem.
Okay.
John, I'll comment a little bit on that too as we wait to continue a conversation. This is Rosangela Parker. I'm with the Church Street District in downtown Orlando. We are one of 10 Orlando Main Streets. Each one of us has our own small area, our own territory, and each Main Street is very different. So while I'm in downtown Orlando, focused on kind of that entertainment hub that is the Church Street District in downtown Orlando, our sister districts include, Ivanhoe and Soto, and there's just a variety of different main streets, each one with a different feel.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosalie.
Yeah, hey, St. Pete has 3 districts as well, and Fort Pierce has 2, and each of those are, each town has a black district. There's Lincoln Park and there's Deuces Live.
Okay. Then we need to make sure we can get that information to some of our local Bradenton people to work, to get people behind them as well, for sure.
John, now I will tell you, we are an application-based program, and application cycle is open now. So they need to pull that down.
Thank you so much. I'll pass that on. Thanks, Catherine. And are you the head of Main Street?
I am the state coordinator. It's run through Florida Department of State, and so I am the state coordinator.
Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and get, whoops.
You got too many open phone lines too close together. That's what's causing that. In my humble opinion, anyway. That's been our experience.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can now.
Okay, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to, next slide, introduce our speakers today. Carol Dover, our President CEO, unfortunately won't be on the call. We have a technical difficulty with her getting in, and I apologize for that, but she may join us later. We got Kevin Johnson with Johnson Jackson. Kevin is a labor attorney and has been a very strong advocate with the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, helping us through this tough time. We also have Rick Van Warner. He's a partner with FTR Hospitality, and Rick's specialty is with crisis management. So how to talk to the media, what happens if you do have an outbreak at your restaurant. Rick is kind of the expert in that area. And we have our own Samantha Padgett, who's with the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, our general counsel. And last but not least, we have our superhero, Mr. John Horn. He's the president of Anna Marie Oyster Bar. And John gives us what's really like to be out there in the restaurant industry, dealing with COVID, dealing with this issue. And he's been a great resource for us. Also, I want to also welcome the Main Street folks on the phone, especially Kathy Beck and Pauline Eaton, who helped put this workshop together. I know there's going to be there's a lot of tough things going on out there in the industry, and we want to try to help you out as much as possible. Some of the resources that the association has, that if you're not a member of the association, or if you're a non-member and you want to get our industry alerts, these come out almost every Friday or every other day now. These are great resources, or great pieces of information to help you guide you through these tough times. I strongly encourage you to sign up with us through our website. We also have newsletters, digital magazines, and we have countless webinars. If you go to our FRLA.org page and go to webinars or COVID-19, there are all kinds of webinars. They're free to download. I strongly encourage you to go and check those out. And last but not least, we have a new seal of commitment, which we'll be sending out this afternoon to everybody on the call. And I won't get into details of that right now because time is precious and I want to get on to with the webinar. Again, all the information is on www.frla.org. And last but not least, we have several of our regional directors on the call this afternoon. These are also folks in your backyard if you need any help whatsoever. I believe Danette's on the phone, Nicole, Jody Cross, Lynn Hernandez, Nick Lowe, Carrie Burns, Rosita. These folks in your area, there's a phone numbers there. We will also send this information if you need help, especially things are happening locally that are not necessarily happening at the state level. There's confusion. What's happening in Miami may not be happening in Pensacola and so forth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Samantha Paget, because I know there's some questions about how the bars open and why they can't be open and so forth, or what the rules. Samantha, I'm going to turn it over to you if you'll take over, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we saw last week earlier this week that the Department of Business and Professional Regulation put new regulations out that closed down quote unquote bars in the state of Florida. And that doesn't mean all bars anywhere. That means specifically those establishments that really focus all their energies on only serving alcoholic beverages. That does not focus on bars in restaurants. So there was a lot of confusion surrounding the first order that DBPR put out. And in response to that, they put out an amended order. And of course, as with all government orders, that one creates questions as well. And so what that says is that if you are a bar and that you are only licensed to serve alcoholic beverages, that you must shut down. However, those establishments are still able to do what's called package sales. They can sell alcohol for off-premises consumption. They're just not allowed to do on-premises consumption. For those establishments that are licensed to serve alcohol, but also licensed to serve food, then they can remain open and they can sell both food and beverage from their establishment as long as people are seated and following all of the requirements that the executive orders have put forward. So tables 6 feet apart, people socially distanced, and following all the regulations that apply. So you see in the first order that it talked about the percentages of 50% or more, 51% or more. And I spoke with the general counsel of DBPR this morning, and he said the second order, the amended order, doesn't really focus on those percentages. I won't say they go away completely. You have to go back to what license your establishment holds. If you have what's called an SFS license or a special restaurant license, that percentage is a condition of your license. Under that license, you are able to serve liquor, but only if you sell more than 51% of your establishment sales, your gross sales, are in food or non-alcoholic beverages. That percentage hasn't gone away because it is a condition of your license. However, if that's not your license, if you are a quota licensee or you hold another license and you are also licensed to serve alcohol, then you can remain open to serve food and alcohol, but you must follow all the occupancy and social distancing requirements. And as I encourage everyone, always go back to the words of the order itself and always know what kind of license you hold. And those are your two best pieces of information as you try to figure out how to conduct business in your establishment. And that's it for that one.
Any questions for Samantha? If not, we're going to move on. All right. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know Carol can't be here, so we're going to put this slide on we're going to let you handle the slide. You ready, Kevin?
Sure. I'm here. So I would just start off by saying one of the things we're facing, as everyone is aware, is there's really been a spike in the cases, and we're seeing that and trying to deal with that right now. And because Florida is one of the jurisdictions that went forward with reopening and moved forward fairly aggressively with trying to get everyone back in business, it's put a lot of political pressure on us to try to basically put a dent in this spike. And so that's part of what drove the order to close bars again. And what we need to understand is that our industry and all of us that have restaurants and that are operating in this space really have to do our part to come together to try to prevent this spike from getting any worse and to start turning it around and getting it in the other direction. So as we talk today, this is what Carol's message has been consistently, is that we need to be at the point where we are going above and beyond, to the extent we can, what the law requires or what the executive orders say, because we really need to make sure we get this thing stopped if we want to remain in business. Because the alternative is, if it keeps going the wrong direction, the numbers keep spiking, and if hospital beds aren't available, then they are likely to close down restaurants as well. So that's a little bit of what we're facing here. There's some real pressure on us. So from FRLA's perspective, what we're trying to do is really emphasize prevention. And that prevention cuts a couple directions. The first one is we want to make sure all of our employees are safe. The second one is we want to make sure all of our customers are safe. And to do that, we have some requirements we need to be following. The first one is that we need to follow Executive Order 20-68. Okay, and if you haven't found that, you can go on the web and you can pull it off the governor's website. All you have to do is Google Florida Executive Orders and go down to Executive Order 20-68. If you read through it the first time, you may say, well, it looks like this isn't even in effect anymore. It was only in effect for 30 days. And guess what? It has been extended through a series of other executive orders. I won't take you through it because it's very complicated how it all fits together, but it is still in effect. And those are the rules that the Department of Business and Professional Regulation are looking to in deciding whether restaurants are in compliance. And so you need to get a copy of that and start looking at what it requires. And what I'll tell you is, when it gets to restaurants, it has a series of things it wants us to do. One of them is to ask our employees whether or not they have, first of all, traveled through an airport within the past 14 days or traveled on a cruise ship within the past 14 days. And we should be asking that of employees every time we open up our restaurant, okay? We then have some requirements for how we have to deal with people who have been exposed or who may be sick. And the number one requirement is that if any person has been infected with COVID-19, they cannot come on the premises of our restaurant until they have had 2 consecutive negative test results separated by 24 hours. Okay, so no employee can come in who's had COVID-19 unless they're cleared by 2 negative test results. And if you have an employee who's showing up who has symptoms or signs of respiratory infection, including cough, fever, shortness of breath, or sore throat, you have to exclude those from your restaurant as well. And if you know that some of your people have been in contact with any person who's known to be infected with COVID-19 within the past 14 days, you have to keep them out until they test negative. Now, there's a little bit of a ambiguity there in terms of whether that requires 2 tests or just 1. My interpretation looking at the text of Executive Order 68 is it probably only requires 1 test for a person who's just been in contact but is not known to be infected. But I'll invite Samantha to jump back on if you've heard differently from DBPR.
I have not. That has been my interpretation and my understanding as well.
All right, so there's the distinction. If they're sick and actively have symptoms, they need 2 tests to come back, and they have to be negative. And if not, then you need to, if it's just someone who's been in contact, you probably only need 1 test. But you need to be asking those questions each day, and you need to be doing the other things that we see on slide 8 here, which is encouraging all individuals to wear masks in public, whether it's required by local government or not. All right, and we'll talk a little bit further in Rick's section about how you handle that. But you need to know that we need to make it our policy that when people come into our restaurants, they ought to be wearing masks to the table. That's what we think is the best practice these days. You can take that mask off once you get to the table, once you're eating or drinking, but especially if you are standing out in line. Carol mentioned in a previous webinar that she was at a restaurant that had a 3-hour wait last weekend, all right? And you've got a ton of people congregated outside, standing around each other. Those people need to be in masks, or they need to be dispersed and sent back to their cars, or to find somewhere to wait, because you don't want to create a bottleneck where everyone stands around, breathes the same air, and gives it to each other. So you also need to have folks practicing social distancing and staying 6 feet apart from others. That's pretty obvious. We all know what that means, and we know that we're going to try to do that in our restaurants. Let me also talk about the back of the house, because it's come to our attention that there have been some operators out there who thought that this type of thing really applied only to the servers. So they had their servers in masks, but they didn't have the kitchen folks in masks. And I understand it's hot. I understand we're in the middle of summer, but you need to have everyone in your restaurant who is an employee in masks, no matter how hot it is. And the practical reason why, even though those people may not come in contact with customers, if you have just one person in the back of your house who's sick, and they stand there for an 8-hour shift or 6-hour shift and breathe the same air and exchange that air with everyone else in the kitchen, you can lose your entire kitchen, and then you're going to have to shut down. All right. And you also need to make sure that you're continuing enhanced disinfecting and sanitation procedures. So that's really important, because we need to be doing that extra level of cleaning each night. And if someone does come down with symptoms and is in the restaurant, or tests positive after having been in the restaurant the last 24 to 48 hours, then you probably need to do an extra deep level of cleaning. And we can talk later on about whether that should be your own employees or whether that should be somebody that you hire as an outside contractor. You know, there's pros and cons to both, and I'll let Rick address some of the pros to having your own employees do it. So let's look at the next slide if we can. This is a quick bit of information about a home testing solution kit that's available for hospitality folks, and you can contact FRLA if you need more information about it. But we're going to jump right now to the special considerations that we need to be aware of, and these are the general rules that govern us under the Centers for Disease Control. You can find these on the CDC website in their COVID area. There is a specific set of guidance that has been put out for bars and restaurants, and it's called Considerations for Restaurants and Bars. Okay, that guidance is not something that will trump what you hear from the executive order of the governor or from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. It's meant to supplement that. This is generalized guidance provided by CDC. And why that's important is because there may be places where the executive order diverges from what CDC says in some key ways. And in those cases, you need to be following what the executive order says, not just saying, well, CDC says I can get away with less than that. One key example of that would be returning employees to work after they've been infected. Okay, if you have someone that's out, obviously you're going to send them home. You're going to tell them to go see the doctor if they need to, or otherwise quarantine for whatever period of time is necessary for the symptoms to go away. Well, under the CDC guidelines, there was a non-test-based strategy to return people to work that said if you've been out for 10 or more days and you've not had symptoms for the last 3, then you can return to work as long as you're not having a temperature and the symptoms have gone away, and that's not just because you're taking a whole heck of a lot of medicine. Under the executive order, we don't have that option. Under the executive order, if someone has tested positive, the only strategy that you can use is the test-based strategy. That's our reading of the executive order right now. And that's the way they seem to be interpreting it when they're out in the field. So you need to be aware that that's an example of look to that executive order as your first rule, and then look at what CDC says in its interim guidance as sort of your backup and your for further reading type of stuff, okay? There are some safety practices in here for critical infrastructure workers. That third guidance is important too, because what it says is just because someone may have been exposed, you don't necessarily have to send them all home and shut down. You have a variety of different ways you can approach it, and different restaurants are taking different strategies. Some are shutting down entirely if they have folks that have been exposed to someone who had COVID. Others are saying, we're just going to continue to work with masks. We're going to continue to maintain social distancing, do the deep cleaning, because frankly, this is a risk that we have. This stuff is out in the community. And just because you're in my restaurant for 20 or 25 hours a day doesn't mean that you might not have gotten that somewhere else in the other 140 hours of your week. So being aware of that, if you do choose to go that route and keep people employed in your restaurant, even if they've been around someone, you need to know what the general rules are for that. And under the CDC guidelines, they generally look for close contact, and they define that as if you've been around somebody who's symptomatic for at least, you've been within 6 feet of them for at least 15 minutes, you're considered to have been in close contact. Again, when you go back to the governor's order doesn't specifically mention close contact. It says contact. Samantha, has there been any guidance from DBPR on how they interpret that?
We have not received further guidance. I kind of err on the side of if they meant to say close contact, they would say close contact because they reference the CDC elsewhere in the order. And so that maybe we should interpret it as being something slightly more than close contact. But
So
we have not
that's-
received specific guidance on that.
That's going to be something you need to talk about with your labor and employment lawyer in terms of how you interpret that. Because obviously what the executive order would prefer, if you read it and take it at face value, is that if you've had people that have walked through and breathed the same air as that person, that you ought to treat them as having been exposed. Now, there's some practical reasons why, you might say, well, I don't think if they were just around them for 15 seconds, that's enough. But if they were around them for any significant length of time, you probably need to treat them as having been in contact with that exposed person. So what does that mean? That means you would have to send them home, and you would not be able to let them back under that executive order until they had a negative test. So that means, you could theoretically lose people for the amount of time it takes to get that negative test back. All right. And that might be in some cases 3 or 4 days. There's some real backlogs developing at these testing sites. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? That really means you need to put a lot of pressure on your folks to act smart. So let's go to the next slide.
Kevin?
Sure.
Hey, can I ask John Horn? And I know Samantha has to leave in a minute. I want her to cover something before she leaves. But okay. John, how are you guys handling it at your establishment? Do you mind jumping in there, John Horn?
No, I don't mind at all, Dan. The biggest thing or takeaway I can tell everybody is it's not a matter of if COVID comes into your workplace, it's a matter of when COVID's going to come into your workplace. We were faced with a positive test at one of our restaurants. We have 4 on the West Coast, and it's all about being prepared for a positive COVID case, because you need to know what steps you're going to take immediately. You don't need to say, oh my God, Joe just came in and told me he tested positive. What do I do? You've got to have that plan in place, and you've got to be ready because everyone will know quickly. You've got to communicate with staff. You've got to communicate with guests, and you more than likely will have to communicate with media, because it is such a hotbed right now. People are wanting to know. I mean, we're seeing that restaurants are closing, and everybody has their philosophy on, some places are not clean, so they're use that as a reason to go and clean. Some places are staying very diligent about their cleaning, and they're doing all the time. We fog our restaurant twice a day with a hypochloric acid that we got recommended by a chain of nursing homes. They have 13 nursing homes, and they have 0 COVID cases in their nursing homes. And so, this was just something that came up, and we're doing that in ours, in addition to all our cleaning. And we've got a lot of procedures I'll go with it over later, but you've got to be ready for it. And so I got a call from the local newspaper and said, well, are you going to close? And I said, no. I said, he said, did you decide to close when you heard this? I said, no, I decided not to close 3 weeks ago when our crew got together and we talked about this. We are doing this, this, and this in our restaurant, in our cleanliness. That the person was asymptomatic. They never worked when they started symptoms. The person that had it in ours, and I'm trying to not violate any HIPAA, because Lord knows I'm not good at this, not violating any PR or PC or HIPAA rules. But I said, no, this person was off for 2 days and became symptomatic, started with a fever and migraines, and didn't come in. So we told him he had to get tested. He tested positive. He never worked from the time he was asymptomatic until in. So we felt we had done everything. We communicated with our staff, and that also is a key thing. You've got to let your staff know what's going on. Obviously, when someone's not there for 14 days, they can pretty well figure out who's, is the person. When you say, we had a staff member, a team member test positive, you never had any direct contact with that person, whatever, you may have worked in different parts of the restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. Or if they did have direct contact, then we have sent that person home to get testing and not allowed them back in until they have a negative test. But you've got to have that plan ahead of yourself. And you've also got to plan, and everyone needs to plan on how long that person will be out, because it's not just the 14 days. As Kevin and Samantha both said you've got to have 2 negative tests in a 24-hour period. Tests take 5 to 7 days to come back in some cases. So you just about have to add an extra week to that. So this person in my organization, I'm trying to get him, this person back. This person's trying to get back to work, and they're waiting on test results. I mean, they have been fine. They're not medicated. So you have to have 3 days from the time you don't have any symptoms, any fever, any aches, pains, without any medicine. And this person has been in that situation for that long, but now we're just waiting on the second negative test. And so it's a lengthy period, but it's super important to communicate with your staff. And what's going to happen? They get nervous, they get antsy. We've had several that have said, you know, I'm going to stay home because I have an elderly parent in my home, or I have someone with immune, very worrisome immune situation in their home. So they've decided not to work for a period of time. But you've got to be positive with your staff. Like, you've got to call them and say, hey, we had a positive case in our restaurant today. We just found out. You never came close to working with this person. No one did. Everything's fine. You know how we've been handling our sanitation. We, have QR codes for our menus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are the cleanest restaurant around. We're doing everything to protect your health and our guest health. And we're doing it's out there, but we're doing everything we can to keep it out of our restaurant. I see you're scheduled today at 3, so I'll see you at 3. Looking forward to it. So you've got to be positive with that staff. You've got to make sure they feel comfortable and that they have not been subjected to it. So those are the key parts in our restaurant and in all restaurants, actually.
Hey, John, thank you. I know Samantha has to leave. We've double booked her on some webinars this afternoon.
She does seem to be bouncing a lot. Like
she's nervous as hell, right? So, hey, Samantha, I know Kevin's going to cover it a little bit later, but would you touch on the mask a bit, please?
So in response to, the mandatory mask orders have been somewhat controversial in certain communities. And an interesting group of people have gotten together and put together these exemption cards. And I think we have a slide that shows the exemption card that says that somebody is exempt from wearing a mask because of an ADA concern, Americans with Disabilities Act. They've put the symbol of the U.S. Department of Justice on it, and the name of this organization, the FTBA, the Freedom to Breathe Association. The Department of Justice has come out and clearly marked these cards as fraudulent and false. And the FTBA is not even an existing organization, it is made up. So wanted to make businesses aware that if you do have a mask requirement in your area and someone shows you this card, this is a fraudulent card. This is fake and it does not need to be honored. However, you may have some individuals that have legitimate concerns that may cause them to not want to wear a mask. We talked with our regional directors this morning about treating that very similar to the way you treat the emotional support animal versus service animal question, which is you're very limited in the questions you can ask. You can ask the individual, do you have a condition that would prevent you from wearing a mask? You can't ask them what the condition is. You can't ask for any documentation. You can also ask, is there an accommodation that we can provide for you that would make things easier? For example, if someone is hard of hearing and they need to be able to read lips, well, can you write on a dry erase board? Can you seat them outside so that they're not a danger to someone else? What I cautioned to our membership team was, you work in the hospitality and you work in the customer service industry, you read people and your customers very well. And you have to kind of do that delicate dance and decide, do you want to challenge this person? Do you want to push that issue and risk that maybe they're going to go on Yelp and social media and say that you're an intolerant business? Or is there something that you can do within your business to say, okay, we can accommodate them even if you have serious and legitimate questions about whether or not there is a disability present. Can you seat them outside? Can you seat them further away from other patrons so they're not a danger to other people? But you do as a business have a responsibility, A, to comply with a mask order, and there may be requirements for you as a business there. And you also have a reasonable responsibility to protect your other customers. So just be aware that there is that faction out there of people that are emphatically refusing to wear masks in business, but at least know that this card that people may present is absolutely fraudulent and is not something that needs to be honored. Kevin, do you have anything further that you have guided people in this area that have kind of had to tiptoe around this issue?
Yeah. Can we advance the slides to get to that card so people can see what it looks like? We'll just cover it right now.
And while they're fine, can I just pipe in just a little bit? We instituted, I mean, the city of Sarasota has instituted mandatory, city of Holmes Beach and the city of Anna Maria, but we did it at our restaurant, and we're trying to get as many restaurants to do it as well. We've required all of our guests to wear their mask. And the great thing about it is you immediately know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. I mean, you don't even have to ask anymore. So we have had 99% of our guests are just fine with it. You know, we have just a very, very few people that are upset. We've had people leave, and Kevin will reach it. It's not a human right or a civil right that they can eat at our place, but they don't have to wear a mask. But we've said you have to wear one to get to the table and any movement around our restaurants. Yes, we've upset some of our old time guests. So, we're just counting on them getting over it at some point and coming back to us in the near future. But we have just voluntarily made masks mandatory in our restaurant at all 4 of ours.
Yeah, and you can see this card here so you have an idea of what you're looking at. That FTBA thing is total BS. If you were to go to that website, it doesn't exist. There is no such agency. All right, it's just made up because somebody thought this was a cool stunt to get them out of wearing masks. The problem is, the same problem you have with anything like this, is all the people who are trying to free ride on the ADA, because of their own selfish reasons, make it harder for us to distinguish and deal with those who have a legitimate need. Samantha did a great job of explaining how you would want to handle that, okay? And you are going to have some limitations in how you can find out if somebody really has a breathing difficulty. You can't exactly make them submit a doctor's note. You're just going to have to do the best you can to say, listen, accommodation means we have to balance your need to not wear a mask against the safety and the health of our other customers and our employees. And so that's why we're going to suggest these other possibilities, putting you outside or putting you at a patio or putting you in a corner where you're not around that many people. But this card is not something that by itself grants someone any rights. Now, what if you get the type of person that John's talking about who comes in and says, well, I don't have any disability or anything, but the Constitution says I don't have to wear a mask because, we're Americans here and you can't make me do something I don't want to do. And I think the answer to that is you're going to have to train who's going to respond to that. Rick can talk about the importance of that as well. But let's assume you're going to have a manager deal with someone who's a real hard case on this. And the conversation the manager is essentially going to have is, listen, I understand that you feel strongly about your constitutional rights. I sympathize with you. I don't like it when anyone steps on my rights either. But here's the situation. The Constitution does not give anyone the ability to go overrun someone else's private property and do things that are inconsistent with how that private property owner wants to handle things. Okay, and we've put a lot of time and effort into building our business and looking out for the safety of our employees and our customers. And so our requirement is that you need to wear a mask to your table and you need to comply with the local ordinance if you're going to come on our private property. And that's the end of it. That's what we're going to do. If that's not acceptable to you, then you're welcome to go leave and take your business elsewhere. And your ability to deliver that message effectively is really going to depend upon the managers who are delivering it, how comfortable they are at standing up to it. You're going to have to train them in advance how to do it. And you're going to have to also make sure that they understand that there's times where even though it's the right message, some customers are just so irrational that you do not want to make a stand and you don't want to have someone get hurt trying to deliver that message, okay? You want to communicate it within the bounds of reasonableness. There have been people out there who have hit or assaulted or even shot at people that tried to deliver messages like this that they disagreed with. And so that's why you want it to be a manager. If your manager says, listen, this person just smells of kook and I think they are just nuts and they're going to hurt me, then give that manager the ability to back off and say, you know what, I just want you to know how we feel. We're going to make a special exception for you this time, but going forward, we're not going to make this exception again. And just try to give them the sense that they don't need to come back. All right, if we can step
Kevin,
back.
if you'd stop talking about my dad for a minute, I'd appreciate it.
Oh,
So,
man, it's nuts.
Kevin, just for time's sake, did you cover everything you had before we hand it over to
I think
Rick?
we got most of it, Dan. We covered the accommodation. We covered the rules for people, who are employees. The one thing I would want to say is talk to your employees about this and have them understand, listen, when they're all together in the restaurant, we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. All right. But when they go out afterwards and they go out for someone's birthday and they decide to buy a couple cases and sit out, in someone's house or apartment and hang out and just get drunk together, they're not going to be wearing masks. They're not going to have any of these precautions in place. And you can lose a whole restaurant that way. I had a client call me this morning that's going to have to shut down a restaurant because of behavior just like that. A bunch of people went out, hung out together for someone's birthday, didn't take precautions, and all of a sudden we don't have enough people to run the restaurant, so we're going to have to close it. The other thing is just understand where you are. If people are out, know whether you have to offer them paid sick leave, okay? And there's something called the Paid Sick Leave Act that just came out in March. It's part of this Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And if they are ordered to stay home by their doctor, or if they're under some sort of quarantine, or if it's necessary for them to take care of someone who has coronavirus, they may be entitled to 2 weeks of sick leave. So call your lawyer about that and understand the nuances of it, because it's pretty challenging to figure it out. So Dan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Rick, are you ready? Or are you on a boat somewhere up there? Can you jump in there?
No, I'm good. I'm good. As Kevin and others have already covered, John especially and Kevin, several of the points I'm going to make. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I do want to make one point though. For those of you who took the time to get on this call, obviously you're in the camp of doing the right thing, but this is a serious, an industry shut down to takeout and delivery only is not that far fetched. In fact, California yesterday, the governor just went backwards, and now all the restaurants in California are no dining areas open. So, we are our government is here in Florida is doing the same, considering some of the same things, and the bar was step one, but as has been said, this is really serious. We've got to not only do the right things ourselves, but we've got to get on the cases of the bad actors that are in the community that are going to ruin it for everyone. So I think, as has previously been said, communicating with your team is a really important part of this. Reinforce all the good things you're doing, whether it's, not only the masks and the social distancing, but, taking temperatures of employees before every shift, the sanitizing and cleaning, the regular hand washing, all the different steps that you're taking in your restaurant every day, and remind people of that. They'll come in, them having the team be able to really feel safe and embrace that is critical. Yeah, I managed to get stung just now. So communicate with confidence on those actions. And that's what John was talking about. The other part is the transparency of making sure that when someone does come down, obviously we can't disclose their name under law, but people are going to know about it. So it's very important to be very open and honest about, yes, we have someone, you shouldn't be worried because of, they haven't worked in this period of time, or consider people who have worked closely with that person, taking tests. The problem with the testing right now, it could take up to a week to get the results. And that's one of the real prohibitors for a lot of people to test the entire staff. But don't leave any room out there for rumors and speculation. Next slide, please. So what do you do if the media calls? Well, first of all, make sure that every employee working in your restaurants understands if they get a phone call or a visit from somebody who says they're with the media, that they know to direct that to a manager. Secondly, make sure your managers are armed and ready to handle any inquiries that come in. And in most cases, you're going to want them to get a name and a number and have the owner get back to, or the general manager get back to the person. We've got, again, be armed. As John said something very important about preparation. It's only a matter of when you're going to have somebody that works in your establishment that comes down positive. So know what you're going to do right away. Number one, obviously, that person cannot be allowed in without the tests that Kevin discussed and the different steps and guidance that are under the law. But also, that's a time when you want to have those points and make sure the managers are armed to deliver those positive points of all the different things that people are doing to stay safe. Next slide, please. In the most cases, and one last thing on the media, in most cases, closing down is just going to create more attention on the situation unless you have multiple cases and it's very clear there's been widespread exposure among your team. Most best practices are not automatically closing down. Instead, a lot of folks are cleaning at night, do deep clean at night, often with employees, which really reinforces the safety and all the things we're doing to keep guests and employees safe. But it's in most cases, you don't want to alert the media or put anything on social media to proactively talk about an employee or two that might have tested positive. Except in extreme circumstances on the social media side, there's a lot of baiting going on. If we go back one slide, please. There's a lot of baiting going on out there, and people are trying to get people to react, not just on the COVID stuff, but on the Black Lives Matter movement and other issues that are going on and protests. So, just be very careful about engaging. In most cases, you're better off not to publicly engage because it's one person. It might be just somebody who's just looking to stir things up. It might not have anything to do with your restaurant, but is just going through a list of all the restaurants in a particular community and seeing how they will respond on social media. So most cases do not engage except in extreme situations. And in those situations, we recommend you also use your PR team or your or outside resources to respond. Managers should be prepared to handle guest questions on anything around COVID, as we mentioned. And I think we've covered the other point. The next slide, please. Next slide. One more, please. So again, in most cases, if it's one or two people that have tested positive, we're not recommending closing. Again, if it's a number of several people and it's clear that there's been almost an outbreak in the restaurant, that's a different story. But you may want to pay to test some of the employees that have been in close contact with anyone who tested positive and do a deep clean. And of course, Kevin's already gone through these conditions about allowing someone back to work. You really have to symptom-free for 3 days without the aid of Tylenol or pain or any fever reduction medicines, as well as those 2 negative tests, which are really, again, with the timing of getting tests back right now and the backlogs, it can be very problematic. So with that, we'd all like to have your questions and address them.
So unmute your mics, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. We have about 10 minutes, and if for some reason you don't want to verbally ask a question, you can send it on the chat line as well. Do we have any questions? Not all at once.
Okay.
Dan, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Dan, I had submitted a written question earlier, and it dealt with enforcement and some of the issues we're seeing at the local level from local police or county sheriffs are saying, well, it's not up to us to enforce the requirements of mask wearing and that type of thing. What is your suggestion in that arena?
Kevin, I'm gonna let the attorney try to answer that, or I might even ask Nick Lowe, who's a former police officer on our staff, to answer it. Either one, Kevin or
Take a quick
Nick?
shot and we'll let Nick give it a try. I think there's different approaches depending upon the ordinance. In some places like Hillsborough County, they put the onus on the business owner. In other places, it's more on the individual who's in the restaurant, the patron. So to the extent you're in one of those places where, like Hillsborough, they try to put it on the business owner, I think we need to take reasonable steps to enforce that. I think that means posting the requirements. I think it means making a good faith effort to try to get people to comply. But I don't think it means sacrificing the safety of our employees to try to make that happen. Okay, and that's how I would come down on it. Nick, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know how some of the sheriff's offices are handling it around the state. So the way this is handled is if it's passed by a county entity, for example, I'll use Leon County because that's where I live. Leon County passed mandatory mask wearing in Leon County. So the entity in Leon County that can enforce it are law enforcement, which would be the City of Tallahassee Police Department or the Leon County Sheriff's Office. Right after they issued that, the sheriff issued a statement here saying they're not going to enforce it, it was more of a good gesture by the county commission. So it's really up to each, if the local county passes it or a city passes it, it's going to be up to the chief of police or the sheriff on whether they'll actually enforce that.
So what about capacity issues and spacing?
If I can take part of that one.
Sure.
As far as the operator, the key thing the operator can do is, one, know their capacity and make sure whoever is at the front door knows their capacity. Because if you're aware of the rules and the regulations and the ordinances and the executive orders and everything else that we're trying to comply with right now, if you're aware of those and you can repeat those back to the person that walks in the door and says, our restaurant license is for 200 people. 50% is what we're allowed to operate it under now is 100, and we currently have 88 people in the room, or we have never had more than 100 people in here at this condition. You're going to put the enforcement officer at ease that at least you're aware of what you're supposed to be doing and you are handling your business in the proper fashion. If you're like, oh, I don't know, or if you have someone that doesn't have any idea, but if you say, we're allowed 200 under normal circumstances. With COVID, we're down to 50%, blah, blah, blah. And so at least then you're letting the enforcement person. One of the problems that some of the restaurants we were on a call, and if I can encourage everybody, talk to your people, use the resources of people everywhere that have been through it. So one said, he had a police officer and he's probably 200 units. He had a police officer that came in and said, no one can sit at the bar. Well, that's wrong. He had a sheriff come into another restaurant that said one thing, and then a DBPR inspector at another restaurant. So it's important that we know what the law says and we know what we're allowed to do. At our restaurants, we're allowed to seat at our bars, but we decided to close our bars, our bars in the restaurants. But that's not what every restaurant can do. Every restaurant's different. Bars are more prevalent in some restaurants than ours. Ours are a holding area for seating. So, but we could seat with social distancing. We don't want our bartenders to have to keep people separated. What do you do in a bar? you get together, you get close to each other, and you have a great time. So it's hard to social distance when you're having beverages.
Hey,
So we
John.
just decided to close ours. I'm sorry, Dan. Yeah.
No, this is Dan. I just want to emphasize, I think you can see their photos or their pictures. Lois Croft, Nicole Chapman, Rosita, several of our regional directors are on the call. Lynn Hernandez, I know. They all have at least like a weekly Zoom meeting where these type of local things are discussed every week. So I strongly encourage you to jump on those phone calls or those Zoom meetings once a week, because it changes. What's so hard about this particular webinar, Lynn's area in Miami changes hourly. I know that they have, if you saw in the news, they've got a law enforcement officer that goes out to each establishment, maybe at least encourage them and may write them a ticket in the future. It changes day by day. That's why it is so important to get our newsletters, get in touch with our local chapter regional directors. And as John said, I don't know how many Zoom meetings John's been on. He's been on at least 10 of ours in the last week. So, and so is Kevin. A few more questions, because I want to be cognizant of our speakers. Both Rick and Kevin are on vacation right now and decided they thought it was important enough to be on this call. So, questions?
Hey, Dan, I got one thing. John, are you equipping your managers with any of the executive orders so that way if an enforcement official does come in, they actually have the documentation from the governor with the executive orders? Are you a fact sheet that they have? Are you doing anything like that?
No, Nick, but that's a great idea to have a FAQ, or, here's what we're complying with, executive order 68 or whatever it may. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great idea.
That's what I've encouraged for the folks that I talk to, is I've said, listen, I've sent them all our documents that are on our website, and you just make up a one-pager for your managers to have in their back pocket. And if they walk in, it's got all that information for them.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Great guidance that's been put out by FRLA. So you might even consider having some of that guidance that has the FRLA logo on it, so they know you're following the best information you can get.
John, what can you say to, or Kevin, what can you say to the members, the folks that may not be familiar with the FRLA? Any encouraging words to them to maybe get more involved?
I just think it's such a great organization, and everyone on here is so committed to trying to keep restaurants open. It is the ability of the organization to reach out to all of the different areas of the state and all of the different types and levels of restaurants and bars, and to get them to speak with one voice. That's what gives us the political power to try to get the ear of the governor. And Carol Dover does a wonderful job of that and can really help us affect our destiny and help us get the conditions we need in order to operate and be successful. So it really helps if everyone gets in and becomes part of that, so we can all speak with one voice.
Well, and to that point too, it puts you together with people that are experiencing the exact same things every day. And so we don't all have to make the same mistake. We can learn from another restaurant having a situation, and then we can bring it to our restaurants. That's the best help of the FRLA, is so that you get the best practices, and you get I'm glad they made that mistake so I don't have to, because Lord knows I make enough on my own. I don't need to make all of them. So that's the benefit of the organizations for sure.
I share something. This is Rosita with Broward County. As you guys know, we've had a very, very strict county orders of our own, and they've been reinforcing. They've been out there giving out all kinds of violations, and up to 50. We had one place that got $15,000 fine because they had multiple offenses. But one of the things that's worked with us too is sharing between restaurants and members to make sure that everybody has the right answers in the right situation. And one of the things I heard today is some of the restaurants that were allowed to sell that were technically restaurants selling more than 51%, wanting to extend their revenue, would stay open after midnight and kind of turn into a club, because I guess you can do it that way but not the other way. And that's why they put a law now that after midnight to 5 a.m., they cannot be serving alcohol. So the county has been very good in trying to address those. And another thing I wanted to share was about the masks. One of our hoteliers says that if they come in and they say that they cannot wear a mask because of some kind of ADA issue that they have with breathing, that he suggests that they should stay home. It should not be out in public because that is not harming their health as well as somebody else's health. So everybody's just handling it, I think, the best they can. And we try to share their stories with each other so that they can be best informed.
Dan, we lost you. You're on mute.
Yeah.
Other questions out there before we close? Going once, going twice. I want to thank our panelists today. I know Samantha had to leave early, but Kevin, John, Rick, thank you so much. You guys are just so informative, and another great webinar or Zoom meeting, and we appreciate it. You have it, folks on the call, if you have any questions, email us and we'll be glad to help you out. The Zoom has ended. Go in peace. All right.
Thank you.
All. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Bye-bye.